My name is Yvonne Tisdale. I'm 68 years old. I taught music theory in a public high school for nearly 3 decades before retiring quietly to a small white house at the edge of a sleepy Virginia town. I grow my own rosemary bake on Thursdays and keep my late husband's chessboard exactly the way he left it mid-game with a note tucked underneath that says, "Your move." I don't need much, but I do remember everything. The morning it happened, I was making tea, mint the kind I only steep when I feel a storm rising behind my ribs. The kettle sang. I turned off the heat, reached for my favorite cup, the one with the faded violets, and that's when my phone buzzed. A text from my son Nathan. It read, "Hey mom, quick update, you're not invited to the vacation. Tanya says this one's just for her family. Hope that's okay." That was it. Not even a full sentence to acknowledge me. Just "you're not invited." No call. No explanation. And it came exactly 2 days after I transferred $240,000 to their joint account for a beach house I'd never even seen. A house Nathan once said was for the whole family to make memories in. I didn't respond. I didn't cry. I simply poured the hot water into my cup and watched the mint leaves float and swirl, and then settle. The steam rose for a moment, then disappeared into nothing, just like my place in their world. You see, I wasn't always this invisible. When Nathan was 5, he used to cling to my hand at the school gates and say, "Don't forget to pick me up, okay? You're my favorite person. I've packed hundreds of his lunches, fought for his school placement, sat through parent-teacher nights with swollen feet, and a smile that tried too hard." When his father died, I sold our second car, tutored late into the night, and never let the mortgage fall behind. And when Tanya came into his life, I welcomed her with lemon cake and open arms. I stood in line at bridal shops, paid for their rehearsal dinner, and wrote a check for the down payment on their first apartment because they were starting fresh and wanted to feel independent. Even last week, when Nathan called in a hurry, something about needing funds to lock in a once-in-a-lifetime beach house deal, I didn't hesitate. He said it was their dream to have a summer place near the shore, a space for all of us. All of us. So I wired the money. $240,000. And now, 2 days later, I get a text saying, "You're not invited." Not just uninvited. Unwanted, unincluded, unnecessary. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't write back. Instead, I poured myself another cup of mint tea this time with a little too much honey just to keep my hands busy. And I sat down at the kitchen table where my son once built Lego castles and cried when they fell apart. I thought about that house, the beach house I had just bought for them. A house I would never enter. A porch I would never sit on. A guest room that would never carry my perfume or the sound of my laugh. The truth is, I didn't want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. A seat at the table I helped build. But there comes a moment, quiet and cold, when even the most patient mother feels the door close behind her. And that morning, while the tea cooled and the silence settled, I realized maybe the most dignified thing I could do was not knock, not beg, not remind them who I've been, but simply take it back. So I did. He used to call me a hero, not in the over-the-top comic book kind of way, just in the quiet, matter-of-fact tone only a child could use when they still believed in magic and mothers who could fix anything. Nathan was 6 when he said it first. We were walking back from the grocery store, bags in both hands, and the wind was sharp that day, the kind that slices through your coat seams and bites at your cheeks. I remember his mittens were mismatched, one red and one blue, And he looked up at me with chapped lips and wide eyes and said, "You're my hero, Mom. You always carry the heavy stuff." He didn't know I was carrying much more than bags that day. His father had been gone barely 3 months. A heart attack in the staff parking lot. 46 years old. Gone in a blink. And just like that, I became two people. Mother and father. Breadwinner and nurse. Comfort and discipline. I went back to teaching 2 weeks later. Took on after-school programs, weekend tutoring. Sold Elliot's old guitar to cover our heating bill. Cut coupons. Cried into the laundry at night so Nathan wouldn't hear. There's something feral that awakens in a woman when she realizes no one is coming to rescue her, especially when she has a child looking up at her like she hung the moon. I built us a life from that raw place. It wasn't glamorous. It was practical, deliberate, full of list-making and secondhand shoes. But I made sure Nathan never felt the absence of love. Only the presence of effort. He was a bright kid, sensitive. He used to draw pictures of our house with the words, "me and my mom," and hot chocolate scribbled underneath. I framed one of them. Still have it tucked between old recipes and report cards I could never throw away. There was a time when he used to wait for me after school, not because he had to, but because he wanted to ride home together. He'd sit in the back row of my classroom, swinging his legs, reading aloud from science books while I graded papers. Sometimes he'd fall asleep with his head on my arm, and I'd freeze like that for 20 minutes so I wouldn't wake him. One evening, after I finished a particularly long shift, the heat had gone out in the building, my fingers were stiff with cold. Nathan handed me a drawing. It showed me standing with a cape and a crown made of stars. The caption said, "This is my mom. She keeps the lights on. She's the firekeeper." I didn't know what that meant at first, so I asked. He told me, "In stories, there's someone who keeps the fire burning so the others don't freeze." And that's how he saw me. Not just someone who made dinner and checked his homework, but the one who made life livable. Those were our golden years. Not because we had money, God knows we didn't, but because we had each other and we knew what we were fighting for. I remember once a boy at school teased him for wearing secondhand sneakers. Nathan stood tall and said, "My mom works harder than your dad. That's why we don't care about shoes." He came home and told me that story with pride. I remember laughing and ruffling his hair, telling him shoes wear out, but spine lasts a lifetime. I never imagined there would come a day when the boy who once defended me like that would grow into a man who forgot why the fire mattered. But life is strange like that. Sometimes the children you carry through the storm forget what the rain felt like. They build their lives on your sacrifices, and then paint you as the stranger outside their warm window. Still, I don't regret the years I gave. Not a single packed lunch, not a single night lesson, not 1 minute spent holding his hand through the dark. Because even if he no longer sees me as his hero, there was a time he did. And that memory, that drawing with the crown of stars, that's mine to keep. I didn't notice it all at once. No, Tanya was far too graceful for that. It was in the subtleties. A text that came from her phone instead of Nathan's. A change in the way holidays were described from "can't wait to see you" to "it might be tight this year." It was gradual, like erosion. You don't realize the shoreline is retreating until your feet are wet. The first time I truly felt it was during her baby shower. Or rather, after the baby shower. I hadn't been invited. At first, I assumed it had been an oversight, maybe a miscommunication, maybe Tanya's mother had taken the lead and forgot. I even double-checked my email, my mailbox, my text threads. Nothing. When I asked Nathan, he said, "Oh, yeah." Tanya's sisters handled it. I thought you might not want to come, all that pink and noise, you know. I smiled and nodded. What else was I supposed to do when their daughter was born? I sent flowers. I knitted a blanket. I waited a week before visiting, wanted to give them space. When I finally arrived, Tanya met me at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, we weren't expecting company. I stood there holding a gift bag and my breath. She let me in eventually. I held the baby, stayed 15 minutes, left quietly. It's strange how silence can bruise. No yelling, no accusations, just a soft locking of doors. Christmas that year was at their place. I offered to bring pie, maybe the roast. Tanya texted thanks, but we've got it all covered. We're keeping it small, just the 5 of us. 5. Nathan, Tanya, their 2 kids, and Tanya's mother. I sat at my own table that evening, set a plate for myself and one for memory. The cranberry sauce tasted metallic. The pie crust was too dry. I watched It's a Wonderful Life and wondered when mine had stopped being that. There had been a time when I was the first person Nathan called for recipes, for advice, for absolutely nothing at all. He used to call just to say, "Love you, Ma," in the middle of a Tuesday. Now I was an obligation, a holiday card, a birthday text with a heart emoji that felt like punctuation, not affection. But the moment that etched itself into me, the one I go back to when people ask why I pulled away, was Easter. They'd invited a few friends over. I offered to come help decorate eggs with the kids. Nathan hesitated, then said, "Well, we've only got 5 chairs, Mom. It's going to be tight. 5 chairs." I nearly laughed. I had taught him how to sand wood, helped him build his first bookshelf, bought the damn dining table. They were using chairs and all. Yet somehow there wasn't a 6th chair. It wasn't about furniture. It was about space, about who was included, who was not. You see, when someone wants you there, they make space. When they don't, they tell you it's too tight. That's when I knew. I wasn't inside anymore. I wasn't part of the core. I was the satellite they waved to when it passed overhead. And Tanya, she never said anything unkind, never yelled, never fought. She simply never made room. People think exclusion has to be loud, that it comes in slamming doors or harsh words. But no, sometimes it comes in quiet omissions, in seating plans, in photos you're not in the 6th chair that was never added. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. And I certainly didn't beg. I just sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I used to slice Nathan's apples into stars and reread the text again. "You're not invited. My wife says this vacation is for her family." I let the message sit there, like spoiled milk, sour and silent. 2 days earlier, I'd wired $240,000 from my late husband's retirement savings. That beach house, the one Tanya now claimed, was for her family. I bought it. Every board and bolt. They didn't ask for it directly. Nathan had mentioned they were tight on the down payment, said the kids needed space, that the beach was good for their development. I offered. I always do. And when the title came, I didn't even ask for my name to be on it. I trusted my son. That was my mistake, not generosity, but assumption. But that afternoon, as I sat with that message staring back at me, something in me shifted. Not anger, not revenge, just resolve. I didn't want to take anything from them. I just refused to disappear. That's when I remembered Erin, a former student of mine from my early teaching years. She had grown into a sharp, respected estate lawyer. We had coffee once after her mother passed. She'd said, "If you ever need anything, Ms. Tisdale." I mean it. So I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was warm, familiar. Ms. Tisdale, it's been too long. I told her the basics, left out the bitterness, just the facts. She didn't interrupt, didn't pity me, just asked, "Do you want this to be a fight, or do you want it to be clean?" "Clean," I said, "and quiet." She nodded. I could hear it through the phone. "I think we can restructure this. You sent the funds as a gift. But if we create a conditional trust retroactively, we can attach stipulations tied to use of the asset. If they violate those terms, the trust reverts and reclaims the property." It sounded like another language to me, but the clarity in her tone made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Agency. I scheduled an appointment. Wore my navy blue coat, the one Elliot used to say made me look like a woman who read contracts for fun. We met in her office. Glass walls, soft lighting, no drama. Just solutions. Aaron laid it out simply. "We'll draw up a retroactive conditional trust. You are the settler, the originator of funds. The terms will state that you, as the contributor, must have full access and right to use the property for at least 4 consecutive weeks per year, including 1 family-designated holiday. Failure to honor that condition initiates automatic property reversion." In English, I asked. She smiled. "If they don't let you in the house no longer belongs to them." I exhaled. Not from relief from alignment, from knowing I wasn't powerless. I'd just forgotten where I kept my voice. The papers were drawn, notarized, filed. I didn't send a warning, didn't gloat, didn't even text Nathan, just silence. I figured if they wanted a vacation for her family, they should understand what family meant, and what it cost to forget the one who kept the lights on. A week later, I got a call. Not from Nathan, from Tanya. Her voice was clipped. "There's a letter here from a lawyer. Some kind of trust notice." I paused. Sipped my tea. "Yes," I said, "that's mine." A silence so thick I could hear her blinking. "But you gave us that money." "I didn't sue," I replied. "I just declined to be erased." I never replied to Tanya's call. I never called Nathan back. And most importantly, I never got on that flight. It was a round trip to Sarasota, fully paid departure, Friday morning. I'd booked it weeks earlier, assuming I'd be part of the family trip, assuming I was still family. I remember sitting on my bed the night before the flight suitcase open, filled with soft linen pants, the wide-brimmed hat Nathan got me for my 60th birthday, and a new pair of sandals I'd bought just for the beach. But I didn't zip it. I didn't finish packing. Instead, I took each item out one by one, folded them, placed them back in the drawer. It wasn't an act of anger. It was clarity. See, when someone tells you they don't want you somewhere, believe them. When someone says you're not invited, you don't ask why. You don't show up and try to squeeze into a seat that was never meant for you. You stay home, and you reclaim your space. I canceled the flight at midnight. Didn't tell a soul. Didn't post about it. Didn't make a scene. I simply chose not to go. Aaron had finalized the trust reclassification that same day. With my signature, the property was legally locked under what she called a revocable limited access trust. It meant the house was now under conditional ownership. Nathan and Tanya could still use it, but only if they abided by the original stipulations I'd agreed upon. I had the right to reside there for a minimum of 4 weeks per year, including at least 1 holiday. If they violated, that the trust could revoke their title and reclaim the asset. Aaron called it a protective measure. I called it a boundary. I wasn't punishing them. I wasn't suing anyone. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was simply done performing a role that wasn't written for me. done giving endlessly to people who treated my kindness as currency they never intended to repay. People often mistake silence for surrender. But in my case, it was a declaration. I was no longer available for emotional overdraft, no longer funding connection that only traveled one way. I stayed home that weekend, made myself tea, sat by the window, read a chapter from an old mystery novel. The house was quiet, no children laughing, no suitcase rolling through the hallway. But it was peaceful. I didn't cry. I didn't curse them. I just let it be. On Sunday, I checked the flight tracker out of habit. Their plane had landed. I imagined the kids racing to the sand, Tanya unpacking color-coded bags, Nathan struggling to lock the sliding glass door that always stuck. And I felt nothing. Not jealousy, not sorrow, just distance. Physical, emotional, legal. No one saw me leave because I didn't storm out. I didn't throw words like daggers. I simply stopped showing up where I wasn't welcome. I withdrew my presence the same way I once offered my love, quietly, completely, without demand. People talk about revenge like it has to roar. But sometimes, the softest retraction is the loudest thing you'll ever do. That week, the trust took effect. They were notified, officially, formally. Tanya called again. I didn't pick up. I figured if she wanted clarity, she could talk to Aaron. Because I wasn't the woman standing in the cold waiting for an invitation anymore. I was the one holding the pen. And this time, I wasn't signing checks. I was drawing lines. I first met Maureen when I moved into this neighborhood 15 years ago. Her hydrangeas bloomed before anyone else's. Her mailbox was the only one hand-painted a little lavender field under a sky of tiny clouds. She was 70 when I met her, a retired school librarian with wrists full of bangles and the most beautiful collection of linen scarves I'd ever seen. We weren't close more porch wave and weather small talk than shared coffee, but there was always a quiet warmth between us. Then, one fall, maybe 3 years ago, her son came to visit. He pulled into the driveway in a rental car, stayed just long enough to trim her rose bushes, then made some loud phone calls on the porch. I remember hearing Mom's house is just too much for her now. It's time. A month later, a moving van showed up. Boxes labeled in someone else's handwriting. And just like that, Maureen was gone. The house sat empty. Her lavender mailbox faded. And every time I looked out my kitchen window, I saw absence where presence used to be. Then, out of nowhere, 2 winters later, Maureen came back. Not just for a visit. She moved back in. She shuffled up the walkway with a single duffel bag, a new scarf, and no fanfare. It was like watching someone reclaim their name. I baked a pie that week, cherry almond, and brought it over. She opened the door with a grin. Well, she said, I guess I missed my creaky floors. We sat in her kitchen, surrounded by empty walls and the scent of cinnamon. I asked if she wanted help unpacking. She shook her head. I didn't bring much back, just what belongs to me. The rest can stay gone. I didn't push, but I asked gently, did you decide to leave the care home? She laughed, not bitter, just dry. They decided it for me, said it was best, that I'd have company, but no one told me company isn't the same as comfort. She sliced the pie slowly. I gave birth to a boy who now says I need supervision, as if being old means being foolish, as if forgetting where I placed my reading glasses means I've lost my compass. Then she looked at me, eyes sharp. Let me tell you something, Yvonne. Being a mother doesn't mean you have to stay put until someone decides you're a burden. It doesn't mean you have to stay. At all. That sat with me. It doesn't mean you have to stay. She continued. They put me there thinking I'd fade. And I did a little. For a while. But then I realized I still had keys. I still knew the bus schedule. And most importantly, I still knew my name. I helped her hang a painting that afternoon, a single heron flying above water. She said it reminded her of her younger self. I said, it looks like it's heading somewhere. She nodded. Exactly. After that day, we spoke more often, exchanged books, shared quiet mornings in our respective rocking chairs. Maureen never complained about her son. She didn't need to. Her return spoke louder than any accusation. And one spring morning, as I was pruning my own bushes, she called over the fence. Yvonne, if they ever try to move you out, remember the door swings both ways. I smiled, nodded. But inside, something cracked open. She wasn't talking about real estate. She was talking about presence, about reclaiming identity, about remembering that motherhood doesn't end when your usefulness is questioned. It was Maureen who taught me that we're allowed to leave places we no longer recognize, that boundaries aren't betrayals, that the most dignified act is sometimes just choosing where to stand. And as I watched her sip tea on her porch, the lavender mailbox freshly repainted, I realized she didn't run away. She returned to herself. And maybe, just maybe, that's what I was doing too. The letter came on a Thursday. A real letter, not a text, not an email, not a forwarded message typed in haste. It was handwritten, in slightly slanted cursive, neat but unsure, the kind of penmanship you expect from someone who still crosses their sevens and dots every I with intention. The envelope was pale blue. No return address. Just my name spelled correctly, Mrs. Yvonne Tisdale. I opened it by the kitchen window. It smelled faintly of lavender lotion and lemon balm, and I knew instantly it was from April. April is Tanya's daughter from a previous marriage. She was 9 when Tanya married Nathan, a shy, soft-spoken girl with big hazel eyes and a notebook always tucked under her arm. She never called me grandma, and I never asked her to, but she always hugged me just a second longer than the other kids did. I unfolded the letter, heart caught somewhere between curiosity and caution. It began simply, Dear Mrs. Tisdale, I hope this isn't weird. I know we haven't talked much lately, but I wanted to say something, and I didn't know how else to say it. I sat down. I saw what happened. I heard what was said. I know you're not coming to the beach house. I also know you paid for it. Not just with money, but with everything you've done to make this family feel like a family, even when it wasn't yours to carry. I paused. Tears didn't come, not yet. But something inside me leaned forward. Mom said it was just a trip for her family, but that made no sense to me. Because you are family. Maybe not by marriage, maybe not by blood, but definitely by kindness, and presence, and cookies, and quiet understanding. I remember when you drove me to piano lessons even when you had the flu. I remember the cardigan you knitted me when I had that horrible rash in middle school. You were the only one who asked how my science fair went. You even remembered the title of my project. That one made me smile. Plant intelligence can peas. Learn to avoid trouble. Yes, I remembered. I just wanted you to know I notice things. I remember. And I care. When I found out you wouldn't be at the beach house, I asked Mom why. She said it was a decision between her and Nathan, that it wasn't personal. But here's the thing. It felt personal. It felt like you were erased, like everything you did was suddenly invisible. And I couldn't stay quiet about that. Even if no one else sees it, I do. I see you. I pressed the paper against my chest for a moment. That small voice, April's voice, was louder than anything Nathan or Tanya had ever said. It continued. I'm not writing this to make you feel bad. I just want to thank you. For everything. For staying kind even when people stopped deserving it. For never raising your voice. For never making me feel like a step anything. I know it's not much. A letter. A few words. But I thought maybe it could be a small something to remind you that not everyone forgets. You should have been there. That house is part you. That vacation should have had room for the person who made it possible. Maybe one day I'll get to take you somewhere. Just us. No drama. Just sunlight and lemonade and a soft breeze. I'd like that. Love, April. By the time I reached the end, my tea had gone cold. But my chest felt strangely warm. Not because April had chosen me, but because she had remembered me. Because somewhere inside that house, there still lived a conscience. And that conscience had handwriting and lavender lotion and a mind of her own. I folded the letter carefully, placed it inside the recipe box where I keep my mother's shortbread index cards, and I whispered softly, "Thank you, April." Not just for the words, but for seeing me when everyone else chose not to. It was around 9:12 p.m. when my phone buzzed a name I hadn't seen on the screen in over 7 years. Emily, my daughter. My fingers froze above the stove as the kettle whistled. I turned the burner off, heart beating in that strange, stunned rhythm that only memory can summon. I didn't pick up right away, not because I didn't want to hear her voice, but because I needed a second to make sure I wasn't dreaming. She'd gone quiet after her wedding. Her husband Cole had his views on family tight boundaries, short visits, emotional minimalism. Over time, she stopped returning calls. Then came the excuses. Then the silence. 7 years. Not a single birthday. Not a single holiday. I poured the hot water over the mint leaves and sat by the window staring at her name on the screen as if it were handwritten by fate. I pressed callback. The line picked up before the first full ring. Her voice, older, but unmistakably Emily, came through. "Hi, Mom." 2 words and something in me softened. I didn't rush, neither did she. Finally, she said, "I saw the photos. Tanya posted them. The beach trip." I stayed silent. She went on. I clicked through every picture. "I didn't know that was the house you paid for. I didn't know you weren't there." Still, I waited. Let her speak. Let the silence shape the words she couldn't say before. "I'm not calling to blame." "Nathan," she said slowly. "I know he's always had a different kind of relationship with you." Different. That was generous. He'd always needed more. More attention. More comfort. More justification. Emily had been the self-soother. The one who never needed asking twice. Maybe that's why I hadn't noticed when she began slipping away. But for the first time, she continued, "I saw it. I saw you. Or the absence of you." The wind picked up outside, brushing the hydrangeas against the screen. I looked at every table setting, she said. Every group photo. Every chair by the fire pit. And I kept thinking, where would Mom have sat? I blinked hard, and then I realized she whispered, "No one saved you a seat. No one even noticed you weren't there." There it was. Not pity, not guilt, recognition. She wasn't calling because she thought I was weak. She was calling because for the first time in her life, she understood the cost of my quiet. "I used to think you were just there," she said, like the wallpaper of my childhood. Reliable. Constant. Expected. But seeing those pictures without you, it felt like something sacred had been left behind. I let out a breath I hadn't known I'd been holding, and I guess I wanted to say she hesitated, then found the words, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner." The mint tea had gone tepid. Still, I held the cup with both hands, grounding myself in the moment. In her voice, in the crackling bridge being built across years of distance. "I'm not perfect," she added, "and I can't undo 7 years. But I'd like to see you, if you want." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't teary. It was honest. "I'd like that," I said. "I've always liked that." We talked for another 43 minutes, about her garden, about my arthritis, about the lemon tree that never bore fruit, and about nothing, everything. Before hanging up, she said something that stayed with me. "Mom, I didn't see it until now, but I think sometimes the strongest people are the ones who say nothing and keep giving even when no one remembers." I wanted to say, "That's how I raised you," but I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "Thank you, Emily." After the call ended, I sat still for a long time. Not sad, not euphoric, just still like the ocean at low tide. She hadn't come back with fanfare, but she'd come back with her own eyes. And sometimes that's the only kind of return that matters. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday no-return address, just his handwriting. Still, the same cursive I had helped him practice when he was 9 and determined to win the school penmanship award. I turned it over twice before opening it. Inside, a single sheet, cream-colored. Folded once, neatly. The kind of paper you use when you want to pretend you're not panicking. "Mom," the letter began. "I heard from the attorney. I know now the house is frozen. I didn't realize. I didn't think." I paused, letting those words sink in. Didn't think or didn't care to. He'd always had that soft edge of entitlement dressed in manners wrapped in thank yous but hollow where it mattered. The letter continued. "Tanya is upset. I won't lie. She feels betrayed. She says it's not fair to us. But I've told her this was our fault. My fault." It struck me how the word "us" still lingered in every line, as if I had ever been included. As if he had said even once, "My mom will be staying too. I miss you, Mom. I know we've drifted, but I never meant for you to feel pushed out. Not meant, but still done. The vacation wasn't meant to hurt you. It just happened. Tanya's parents had this plan, her siblings. I didn't push for it. That was Nathan's way. If he didn't push, he believed he hadn't participated. But omission is an act. Silence can be complicity." He ended with a line that lingered longer than I expected. "Maybe I forgot what you built, not just for me, but around me. I'm sorry I forgot, Mom." No grand gesture, no pleading. Just 6 paragraphs of careful regret, like a man trying to mop up a spill with words that arrived too late. I didn't write back. Instead, I walked to the drawer where I kept the photo albums. Not the big ones, just a small accordion folder of snapshots, memories that didn't always make it to the glossy pages. There, it was a photo taken from the back porch of the beach house. The sea golden in the dusk. One chair, empty. I slid it into a plain envelope. No message. Only 6 words written on the back of the photo. Some houses can't hold a family. But then I paused. It wasn't the right sentiment. I flipped the photo over and replaced the words. Some houses can't hold a family. But a true family holds everything. I sealed the envelope and mailed it without a return address. That was it. No confrontation. No speech. Just a photo. A sentence. I didn't need him to explain his choices. I had lived them. But what mattered was that the line was now drawn not with bitterness, but with clarity. He'd said his piece, and I had said mine silently, but with enough weight to be heard. A week later, I got a text from him. Got the photo. I understand. Just that. No defense, no questions, and for once, no expectation that I respond. It felt still. Like when the tide recedes and everything is left exposed. Quiet. Honest. I made myself tea that night, chamomile this time. Sat by the window, holding the warm mug close. There are things a mother doesn't need to yell. Sometimes, the truest form of response is restraint. Let them feel the absence. Let them hear the echo where your voice used to be. I woke up before the sun. The sky outside my kitchen window was the softest shade of indigo. The kind of blue that promised peace, not brightness. There was no sound except the gentle ticking of the old clock above the pantry. The same one Nathan helped me hang the year after his father passed. I filled the kettle. My hand knew the motion without thinking. I opened the drawer, pulled out a single bag of dried mint leaves, my favorite. The last of the ones I had grown in the backyard that summer. The ones I had thought I'd share on the porch of the beach house. I set the cup down and waited for the water to boil. It hissed, then whistled as it always had. But this time I didn't flinch. This time I let it sing. When I poured the water over the leaves, the scent rose immediately, fresh, earthy, familiar. I carried my cup to the front porch. There was still a light layer of dew on the railings. The air had that early autumn chill, the kind that wrapped around you like an old friend. I pulled my shawl tighter and sat in my usual spot, right side of the swing. The place I had once reserved for waiting for Nathan's visits, for Emily's calls for holidays, that never quite came the way I hoped. But this morning, I wasn't waiting for anyone. This was mine. The tea was too hot at first, so I held it between my palms, letting the warmth settle into my fingers. I watched as the steam curled and disappeared into the morning light. I remembered the first time I brewed mint tea after receiving Nathan's text. I had let it go cold. I couldn't bring myself to sip it. That silence had burned louder than any fight. But now the cup was full, and the warmth touched everything. My lips, my throat, my chest. It didn't taste like regret anymore. It tasted like release. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the weight I had been carrying. Years of showing up uninvited, of shrinking myself so I wouldn't be too much, of smiling when I wanted to scream, of giving and giving and giving in case that would make me enough to stay. This time, there was nothing to perform, nothing to chase. I was no longer the woman waiting to be seen. I had seen myself. In every boundary I had redrawn, in every call I hadn't returned, in every silence I chose instead of begging. I took another sip and looked toward the garden. The mint had grown back in patches, not perfect, but persistent. Much like me. I thought of April's letter, of Emily's voice trembling on the phone, of Nathan's photo and the words he didn't know how to say until it was too late. And I forgave them, not out loud, not for their comfort, but for me. Because healing wasn't always a parade. Sometimes it was a cup of tea on a quiet morning. Sometimes it was knowing you didn't have to be angry to be done. I reached out and touched the swing's chain, cold, firm, steady. That was what I had become. Unmoving, but not bitter. Still, but no longer stuck. The tea was half gone now. The sky had turned gold behind the trees. I smiled to myself, not because someone had texted or called or knocked, but because no one had to. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be included. I had chosen myself. Nathan came back from the vacation on a Sunday afternoon. It was supposed to be just another unpacking day for them, sunburned from the beach, stuffed with pictures. Maybe some wine still sloshing in their luggage from the family-only dinners I hadn't been invited to. They'd be tired, irritable, full of ocean breeze, and the entitlement that came from assuming everything in life would keep opening for them like I always had. But this time, the door didn't. Tanya tried first. Her key didn't work. She twisted it once, then again, then banged it against the knob like the house was being difficult. Nathan stepped forward, confused. He fished through his backpack, pulled out his set, the one I'd mailed him with the ribbon still on it right after the closing. His key didn't work either. The lock had been changed. Not by chance, not by malfunction, but by quiet, deliberate design. And waiting for them taped neatly to the front door was an envelope with a letter inside. It was from my lawyer, and it wasn't an invitation. Inside were 3 things: a copy of the conditional trust agreement they had never bothered to read, a formal notice of non-compliance, a clause highlighted in yellow failure to permit the original grantor shared access, will result in temporary suspension of rights to inhabit the property. No screaming, no drama, just ink and truth. Nathan stood frozen on the porch. Tanya's face darkened like a storm cloud. I wasn't there, but I know exactly what happened, because control doesn't need presence, and dignity doesn't require an audience. They had expected the house to stay open the way I had endlessly, but like the locks, I had changed too. Nathan tried calling me that night, 3 times. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been silenced by that one text, "You're not invited." What more could I possibly add? The next morning, Tanya posted a photo of herself on social media captioned, "Some people are just bitter and lonely." She didn't tag me, of course not. But it was public. And what she didn't know maybe even Nathan didn't understand yet, was that bitterness never tasted as sweet as boundaries. Later that evening, I received an email from the legal office. A response from Nathan brief, typed in all lowercase. "Hi, we didn't know this would happen. Can we talk?" That was the first time I'd heard the word "we" from him that didn't exclude me. But I didn't reply. Instead, I sat in my chair, tea cooling on the table, and whispered something to myself I hadn't dared believe until now. They locked me out of their hearts before I ever touched a legal lock. And there it was, that sentence, sharp, still liberating. I wasn't being cruel. I was just done pretending my access to love needed to be earned through silence. Later, I learned what happened between them that night. Nathan, in frustration, had snapped, "You said she wouldn't care. You said she'd just fade away." And Tanya, cold as a tide, pulling out, replied, "You told me your mother never mattered that much." They fought. Not because I had taken something from them, but because I had finally stopped giving. A beach house, a boundary, a line that said here and no further. That's what justice looks like sometimes. Not courtrooms or shouting matches, but a woman with nothing left to prove and everything to reclaim, one locked door at a time. He came to my doorstep on a Tuesday morning. I recognized the sound of his car even before the doorbell rang. After all these years, I could still tell the rhythm of Nathan's steps. Not quite heavy, not quite rushed, the sound of someone hoping not to be caught in shame, but also praying to be forgiven. I didn't answer. I stayed behind the curtain, watching as he stood there in a blue sweatshirt, the one I gave him 5 Christmases ago. Back then, he had hugged me with it still in the wrapping paper. Now he wore it like armor. He didn't knock again. Instead, he bent down and placed a manila envelope right at my welcome mat, the mat that once read, "Come in, you are loved." That message had long faded, worn thin by years of people entering and never thinking to wipe their feet. When the car drove off, I stepped outside. Not in a rush, not in fear, just steady. I picked up the envelope. It was light, maybe 2 or 3 sheets of paper inside. I sat down at my kitchen table, that same quiet spot where I had once opened a text that said, "You're not invited. My wife says this vacation is for her family." But this envelope, this time, the words weren't trying to shut me out. They were trying to rewind what couldn't be rewound. Inside was a printed screenshot of that exact message. The same words, bold, thoughtless, immortalized in digital ink. And beneath it, in handwriting I hadn't seen since he was 10, was a note from Nathan. "Mom, I never meant it. Tanya wrote it. I didn't stop her. I didn't know what I was doing. But I know now. There was no sorry. No please forgive me. Just recognition. And with it, a second piece of paper. A legal document. I recognized the format instantly. It was a deed of release offering to sign back full ownership of the beach house to me. No conditions. No strings. No access requested. Only this line typed in the middle of the page. "You don't owe me this house, Mom. I didn't treat you like family, so I'll leave it for the person who did." At the bottom, he signed his name. Nathan Tisdale. Below it, in smaller print, a single typed sentence. "I was your son once. I hope I was good at it when it mattered." I folded the papers. Didn't cry. I walked back into my kitchen and placed the envelope next to the teapot, still warm, still full. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I didn't reach out to say, "I forgive you." Because forgiveness isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's just not needing the last word. The next day, April called me Tanya's daughter. She had heard about the letter. "I think he's finally listening," she said. "I just hope it's not too late." I told her something I had only recently come to believe. It's never too late to stop being silent. But not every silence needs to be broken. And that was the truth of it. Nathan had come to my door. He had returned the key in his own way. But I didn't unlock anything. Because sometimes silence is not a punishment. It's protection. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't being cold. I wasn't being unloving. I was simply being clear. I didn't need him to come back. I needed to know I didn't leave myself behind. I planted thyme this morning, just a small patch along the edge of the garden beds where I used to grow tomatoes for Nathan's sandwiches. The sun was kind and the soil softer than I remembered. My knees creaked when I knelt, but I no longer minded the sounds of my age. They reminded me I had lived fully, deeply, and now freely. 3 months had passed since the beach house was legally transferred back to my name. I never went there again. I didn't need to. It had served its purpose. It wasn't about the bricks or the ocean view. It was about reclaiming a part of myself I'd allowed to be leased out in silence for years. My name is Yvonne Tisdale, not Nathan's mother. Not that lady Tanya doesn't like. Not the one who used to babysit while working 2 jobs. Just me. Yvonne. 68. Widowed. I make a decent peach cobbler and grow my own mint. I take long walks at 6 a.m., and I've recently started learning Italian just for the fun of it. La vita, e adesso my tutor, told me, life is now. Last week, Maureen came by. You remember Maureen, the neighbor whose son placed her in a care home after her fall? She's back. She rented the lower unit of a duplex 2 streets over. It has a tiny balcony just enough for her orchids and a wind chime. I brought her a jar of my rosemary jam. She brought me a book. That's when the idea came. We sat on my porch with 2 rocking chairs that used to belong to my late husband's grandparents. The breeze carried jasmine and the distant sound of kids playing. And somewhere between a sip of lemon tea and Maureen's story of defying her son's idea of what's best, we decided we'd start something. A reading circle for single mothers, grandmothers raising grandchildren, women who feel alone in a room full of people. No dues, no expectations, just books and honest company. We call it the Quiet Hour. Every Thursday, they bring old novels or handwritten letters never sent. We read, we reflect, we cry sometimes, we laugh often, we hold space. And I no longer speak about Nathan, not out of bitterness, but because healing is not retelling the wound, it's knowing you've survived it. I did. I bled in silence long enough. Now I grow things. Last Thursday, a young woman named Kendra came for the first time. She had 2 toddlers and eyes that looked too tired for her 20s. She didn't speak at first, just listened. When the hour ended, she said, "This is the first time in years I wasn't scared to say my name out loud." I told her mine too, Yvonne. She smiled. That's a strong name. I smiled back. There are still days when a smell rosemary roasting in the oven or a color ocean blue brings back a flicker of that beach house, or the silence after Nathan's text. But I no longer brace for impact when memory comes. I let it arrive. I make space at the table. I serve it tea. Then I show it out. I once feared becoming invisible, but it turns out becoming unseen by those who never saw me clearly in the first place is not a loss. It's a release. This morning, I got a letter from April, the only one I still hear from. It was just a postcard with a doodle of a beach umbrella and the words, "Still thinking of you. Hope you're resting somewhere beautiful." I am, right here, with time on my hands, sunlight on my arms, and nothing, absolutely nothing aching in my chest. Next week, Maureen and I plan to expand the Quiet Hour into the local library. There's talk of guest speakers. Maybe I'll read from an old diary. Or maybe I'll just sit in the back watching a woman realize she matters again. Either way, I'll be home. And if anyone asks me, now, "Who are you?" I won't say Nathan's mother. I'll say I'm Yvonne. I live quietly. I live whole. And that is enough. It was early spring when I packed a small suitcase and booked a one-way ticket to Cape San Blas. No announcements, no group texts, no itinerary shared on a family group chat I was no longer a part of. Just me, a faded sun hat, 2 linen dresses, a camera I hadn't touched since Nathan's high school graduation, and a paperback novel I never finished back then because life kept interrupting. I didn't tell anyone I was going, not even Maureen, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted this one thing to belong to me. I flew in on a Tuesday. The airport was sleepy. The cab driver asked if I was meeting family. I said, no, just meeting the ocean. He smiled, didn't ask further. I appreciated that. Cap San Blas looked exactly like I remembered it from 22 years ago, the first and only time I visited with Nathan and James. Nathan was 10 building sandcastles. James had just finished treatment and was finally able to breathe again. I remember him taking my hand and whispering, "Let's come back here when we're old." We never did. Life had other plans. This time, I stayed at a modest rental 2 blocks from the beach. Not the beach house. I didn't even drive past it. I didn't need the ghost of entitlement to rattle around in my chest again. That chapter had closed. Instead, I woke up early and walked. Miles and miles, my sandals in hand, the ocean breeze playing with the hem of my dress. The same breeze that once cooled a sunburnt boy on a beach towel who used to call me Mama the Brave. Now it was just me, and the sea, and silence not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals. I took photos. Not for social media, I don't even use it. Not for proof. Just to remember how it feels when no one's watching. A pelican mid-dive. My shadow stretched across wet sand. Sea foam kissing my feet. My own reflection in a tide pool, older, yes, but not diminished. I sat on driftwood and wrote a letter to myself. Not to Nathan, not to James, not to the version of me who thought her worth was tied to a dinner invitation or a beach house key. Just me. I wrote, you kept showing up for everyone else. This is you showing up for yourself. I had lunch at a shack that served the best clam chowder I've ever tasted. I lingered. I watched a young couple kiss under a striped umbrella. And for the first time, it didn't ache. Later that evening, I walked along the boardwalk at sunset. The sky was a watercolor of forgiveness. I passed a family laughing, carrying plastic buckets and sunscreen-slicked toddlers. One of the little girls ran past me and shouted to her brother, "This is the best day of my life." I smiled. I didn't envy them. I didn't mourn what I didn't have. I simply honored what I did. That night, I sat on the porch of the rental listening to waves and the distant rustle of palms. I sipped mint tea from a paper cup, and I whispered to no one, "Thank you for not inviting me." Because if they had, I wouldn't have been here. In this quiet, in this truth, in this deep, liberating peace. The next morning, I left a seashell on the windowsill, a reminder of presence, of becoming, of beginnings. I didn't stay long, just enough. Long enough to remember that healing doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it's just a step onto a warm beach, a click of a camera, a deep breath where no one tells you who to be. On the flight back, the woman next to me asked if I was returning from a family visit. I paused. Then I said, "Yes, in a way." She nodded, smiled, and went back to her crossword. And I looked out the window, at the clouds parting below, at the morning sun breaking through, and I whispered to myself, for the first time the vacation was mine. And that was enough. I've replayed it all quietly in the spaces between watering my dahlias and steeping mint tea. Nathan's message, the silence after, the beach house I helped pay for, and the door that never opened for me. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I simply chose not to disappear. But that doesn't mean it didn't ache. It does. There are days I wonder if I should have reached out again, if I should have forgiven without waiting for a full apology, if I should have left the house in their names and simply walked away. And then I remember forgiveness is not a synonym for self-erasure. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go with dignity. There's a teacup in my cabinet, chipped just slightly on the rim. It's the same one I used the day Nathan's message came. I didn't throw it out. I still use it. Because broken doesn't mean useless. Sometimes it means cherished even more. I've kept quiet most of my life. I kept the peace at my own expense. I smiled through exclusions, laughed off silence, filled every empty chair with food and forgiveness. But that day, I left the chair empty. I didn't ask why it wasn't set for me. I just stood up and walked away. Maybe you think I was too harsh. Maybe you think I should have sat down anyway, even when the invitation never came. Maybe you would have called back, gone to the vacation, pretended you were welcome. And maybe you would have been right too. But here's the thing. That beach house had 6 chairs on the deck. They bought it with my money. They filled it with her family. They called it theirs, and never once asked if I had a place at the table. What I learned is this. If you're always willing to sit at a table where you're not wanted, eventually you'll forget what it feels like to be truly invited. So I chose to stop knocking. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. April saw me. Emily called me. Maureen sat beside me. And in their small, quiet ways, they reminded me I still existed. Maybe you're someone who's been left out, who's watched others clink glasses in a house you helped build, who's received text messages that felt like eviction notices from your own family. If so, I want to tell you this. You're not invisible, you're not disposable, and you're not wrong for walking away. I didn't do it to hurt Nathan. I did it to find myself again. So now I'll ask you, do you think I was wrong? Would you have stayed? Forgiven in silence? Accepted the scraps? Or would you like me choose stillness over struggle? Quiet over chaos? A life with fewer chairs but one set intentionally? I don't know your answer, but I hope you ask it honestly. And if you've ever been the chair that was never added, if you've ever been the voice no one waited to hear, I leave you with this. You don't need an invitation to belong to your own life. And the next time someone forgets to set a place for you, don't beg them to rearrange the table. Pick up your cup, pour your tea, and sit where the sun finds you. That day when I read Nathan's text, my hand shook, but my resolve didn't. I took back the house. I took back the silence. And most of all, I took back me. Now the only question that remains is this. If you had been in my shoes, would you have waited to be invited back? Or would you have stood up, turned around, and walked quietly toward a life that finally made space for you? Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.